the United States government must find some peaceful solution for this problem. They return Shah to Iran, and all is
Forgotten.
Yeah, forgotten.
But what if they don't return the Shah, Dr. Beheshti?
You must ask them. I am afraid that they will pay the price.
The continuous straining controversy between Iran and the United States led to a crisis that began 39 years ago, yet continues to affect the U.S. to this day. The relationships between the two countries continued to get worse, resulting in the tragic takeover of the U.S. Embassy. On November 4, 1979, in Tehran, Iran, 66 Americans were taken hostage at the embassy. This marked the beginning of the Iranian hostage crisis, which led to a massive failure in the U.S. diplomacy, led by President Jimmy Carter. Many hostages were left with scars beyond the skin. The minimal success could be seen through Canadian cooperation and American press transformation. No one knew how long the Iran hostage crisis would last, but today the tragic event continues to strain U.S.-Iranian relations. The relationship between Iran and the U.S. hit an all-time low in 1953 when the U.S. helped topple the Iranian Prime Minister, replacing him with Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. The Shah was friendly to the U.S., especially when it came to oil. He turned out to be a brutal ruler who killed and tortured thousands of innocent people. Iranians began to protest so much that the Shah left on vacation with his family to Egypt. On October of 1979, the Shah sought medical treatment for his advanced malignant lymphoma. President Jimmy Carter accepted his request and granted him asylum in the United States for treatment. On November 4, 1979, in Tehran, Iran, the relationship between the U.S. and Iran changed forever. Around 6:30 a.m., Iranian leaders gathered between 300 to 500 select students and showed them the plan to attack the U.S. Embassy in Iran. A student was given metal cutters to break the chains, unlocking the embassy gates. At first, students planned to peacefully protest in the embassy and leave when government security arrived, but when it became clear that the guards would not use attack on such a large amount of people because it would have started a war, the plan changed and they attacked the embassy. The students smashed the gates and scaled the walls of the American embassy in Tehran. By early afternoon, they had captured, blindfolded, and handcuffed 66 American citizens and diplomats, including 52 who would remain in their hands for 444 days.
The special report that we planned to bring you tonight was about domestic politics, the battle among the Democrats. But we think the crisis in Iran is more urgent right now than the campaign here at home. Some 60 Americans, including our fellow citizen whom you just saw bound and blindfolded, are now beginning their 6th day of captivity inside the U.S. Embassy.
Ken Taylor, Canada's ambassador to Iran, concealed 4 U.S. embassy workers and 2 of their wives that had escaped while the Iranian hostage crisis was beginning. The 6 of them stayed at the Canadian ambassador's home in Tehran for 79 days. Ken Taylor would eat, talk, and play games with the 6 Americans while they were hiding. The students who began the crisis did not immediately realize that the 6 Americans had escaped. While Iranian students were protesting outside the U.S. Embassy, the workers inside were able to shred and burn many documents, including the papers who revealed who the 6 missing employees were. If word got out that 6 of the U.S. Embassy workers had escaped, the students would find out where they were hiding. If this situation was revealed in the news, the Iranian students would invade the Canadian ambassador's home and bring the 6 Americans back to the U.S. Embassy.
Jimmy Carter first heard the news 66 Americans were taken hostage later that November 4th morning in 1979. 2 days later, November 6th, Jimmy Carter wrote a letter to Ayatollah Khomeini, who took reign after the Shah fled Iran January 16, 1979. The letter was ineffective in the release of the hostages.
The CIA, along with American government, planned a mission in hopes of rescuing the 6 American hostages that were secretly kept in Ken Taylor's home in Iran. The CIA enlisted Tony Mendez, an exfiltration expert, to provide a cover story, documents, appropriate clothing, and needed materials to change their appearance. The agent then went undercover as one of the 7 in a Canadian film crew scouting for a location for the film Argo in Iran. They rescued the 6 diplomats from the Canadian ambassador's home in Tehran to form the crew, then flew all of them back to the United States. The 6 Americans were rescued on January 29, 1980. This event is now popularly known as the Canadian Caper. It was a small yet monumental triumph for American and Canadian relations.
During the 444 days, the American hostages experienced indisputable conditions throughout the Iranian hostage crisis. On the first day, the hostages were paraded around the embassy grounds blindfolded. They were yelled at by bystanders standing on the streets. Many hostages believed it was going to last a single day to prove a point to Americans. Robert C. Ode shared in his diary. They said, "Don't worry, you'll be in your own home by midnight tonight." Conditions the first month were horrible. I was placed in a large room with approximately 20 other hostages. It was very hot, almost no ventilation. I had to sleep on a hard floor with only one small pillow. Then at one point, conditions were relaxed and we were able to play games and talk to one another. The hostage crisis unfortunately sparked a lot of racism against Muslims. The crisis caused a wave of anti-Iranian sentiment directed towards Iranian immigrants.
In April of 1980, the president decided to launch Operation Eagle Claw to save the hostages. A group of soldiers were to travel by helicopter to raid the embassy compound and bring the hostages to an airstrip secured beforehand by the second team of soldiers, who were to fly there from outside Iran. The soldiers and hostages would then fly via helicopter back to safety. However, the operation was filled with problems from the beginning. Late in the afternoon of April 24, 1980, 8 helicopters flew from an aircraft carrier to a remote road in the Great Salt Desert of eastern Iran. They encountered severe dust storms that disabled 2 of the helicopters, which were traveling in complete radio silence. Unable to complete their operation, U.S. forces withdrew from the mission. On their way back, one of the remaining helicopters collided with a support aircraft. 8 U.S. service members were killed, and their bodies left behind were later paraded before Iranian television cameras.
52 of the original 66 hostages were finally released on January 20th, 1981 from the U.S. Embassy after 444 days. They were released just before noon, moments before Ronald Reagan was sworn in. Jimmy Carter was determined to release the hostages while he was still president, but failed to achieve this by only a few hours. His failure to release the hostages during this time in office played a great role when American citizens were deciding whom to vote for. Because of this, Jimmy Carter and the U.S. negotiators did not get credit for the release. Instead, it was seen as Ronald Reagan's first success as president. Some believe the hostages were released soon after Reagan was elected because the Iranian students were afraid of him.
To this day, we are still feeling the effects of the hostage crisis. Sunday, November 4th, 2018, marked the 39th anniversary of the embassy takeover. Some Iranians celebrated by burning U.S. flags outside the old embassy. In addition to this, President Trump issued a travel ban with Iran in 2017, prohibiting Iranians to travel to the U.S., in an attempt to limit acts of terrorism.
Barry Rosen's wife and children were at home in Brooklyn.
What'd we just find out? That what?
Daddy's home.
Hooray!